And so we are shedding some of the positions, making the force lean and mean and ready to operate. And we can surge when a big story breaks. We can surge. We've got additional funding to do that by pulling back some of the funding from the grantees. We have about $17.3 million. So when we have to surge to cover something that's breaking, we can do that.
So Dan Robinson, a 34-year veteran of VOA and a former White House correspondent, here's what he wrote. I have monitored the agency's bureaucracy along with many of its reporters and concluded that it has essentially become a hubris-filled rogue operation, often reflecting leftist bias aligned with partisan national media. It has sought to avoid accountability for violations of journalistic standards and mismanagement. We've got great examples of this, even in the Oval Office. A former VOA associate editor Carol Gruensberg directed staff to, quote, avoid calling Hamas and its members terrorists. Again, this is not the voice of America. This is the voice of America's enemies. And I thank you for trying to clean up the mess. And last question, you've heard a lot of language like a vacuum and gutting and dismantling. I want you, Ms. Lake, to clear the record once and for all in this final question. Address the hysteria from the administration's critics here and clarify what is the administration's objective here. Is it to end U.S. international broadcasting, or is the goal to reform the agency so that actually is the voice of America and not the voice against America?
I believe that the goal of the administration is to reform the agency, but to eliminate, to reform our messaging, but to eliminate a corrupt agency. We don't need USAGM to get a message out, a positive pro-America message out. We can do this through other methods.
Well, deep state bias is one thing, mismanagement, corruption is one thing, but when you are actively undermining American national security, this agency needs massive reform, and I thank you for leading it.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Kamlager-Dove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, and thank you, Ms. Lake, for joining us today. I'm deeply concerned that what the Trump administration is doing to VOA and all of the independent broadcast networks is harming the United States and serving our adversaries. It seems like everyone is sort of saying the same thing, even though they're using different examples. So, Ms. Lake, this is an easy question. Is it your goal to advance U.S. interests or the interests of our adversaries?
We want to make sure we are advancing U.S. interests.
Great, thank you. And earlier, because I too have been here, a question was asked of you about Russia invading Ukraine and if Russia was an adversary. And you answered that question, but I would like it if you could just answer it again. Do you believe that Russia is one of our adversaries?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I do too. So when Trump decided to gut USAGM, the head of Russia Today, the Kremlin state-controlled news broadcaster, actually said, quote, today is a holiday for me and my colleagues at RT and Sputnik. This is an awesome decision by Trump. So, Ms. Lake, why do you think the head of Russia Today would say this is an awesome decision by Trump?
I'm really disturbed that we were spreading Russian propaganda and hiring Russian spies at Voice of America. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, allegedly, there is a Russian operative in the White House Office of Personnel, but you're not asking me questions, I'm asking you questions. The question is, why do you think the head of Russia Today would say, this is an awesome decision by Trump?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I think,
have you talked
but
to
at least you're honest when you say you don't know. I think that the answer is obvious, and that crippling Voice of America actually allows Russia Today to spread propaganda without any opposition. And in fact, the PRC had a similar response. And in earlier lines of questioning, people suggested that the CCP was running VOA. You sort of inferred that
they have more control over VOA.
Beijing was running the VOA, had people in there. So the Global Times, a Chinese state media outlet that spreads CCP talking points, also celebrated your actions and called VOA, quote, a lie factory, pointing to their reports on human rights abuses in Xinjiang. And the Global Times also called VOA, quote, thoroughly biased propaganda poison. I feel like I have also heard that phrase used by members from across the aisle, my colleagues. And that line also could have been pulled right out of your opening statement. So, Ms. Lake, do you think that VOA's reporting on China's genocide against the Uyghurs is a lie?
You know, there's been some good reporting at VOA. I'm not saying all of it has been bad, but any time we're doing Chinese propaganda, when VOA decided to do a 2-minute Chinese propaganda video and produce it, I got a problem with that, and I have a feeling that the men and women across this country do
something that many
well.
of our allies also care about, and we know China's position on the Uyghurs. And so I think it's important that we report on that, and we do so in a true and factual basis. And I also think it's important to say that if you are dismantling, if you are crippling, even if you're arbitrarily shrinking without a plan, because we've heard you answer questions, but we have not been shared any kind of plan, that dismantling an agency that counters PRC propaganda and allowing it to go unchecked is something we should be talking about. Well, if we're not here, then we
propaganda from the CCP.
If we're not here, then we cannot counter it. And I know you have talked about what just happened with Iran, how everybody got put on administrative leave, and then the strikes happened, and then you asked people to come back because I guess somebody had a WTF moment. But then right after that, there was a reduction in force, which you just alluded to permanently eradicate many of their jobs. And so I am just saying that we have to have folks in place to respond to crises, immediate, emergent, on the horizon, and we can't do it with only 2 people in an office using a smartphone, waiting to get direction from a security advisor who hasn't even been confirmed or brought up for confirmation from the Senate. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I can say for myself, I appreciate that a lot in journalism are freelance journalists, and they're not constantly on the payroll. I think it's a good model that the U.S. government should look at. When are they needed and when are they not? Chair now recognizes Representative Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Lake, we really appreciate what you're trying to do in the reform and really appreciate you being here. You know, my question focused on, I know some of my colleagues and the public observers are really concerned about what's happening in the USAGM and are unhappy about what seems to be reducing its capacity to communicate with foreign national populations around the world. Of those, you know, Chinese, North Koreans, Cubans, Venezuelans, Russians, and Iranians. They further claim that our reduction in withdrawal from the broadcasting spaces will create a vacuum that these other governments, many of which are communist governments, will be happy to fill. I'm not sure that I agree with that at all, but I would ask you, how would you respond to these critics for your current efforts to consolidate broadcasting efforts?
We can't continue to spend money the way we have in the federal government. There have to be ways that we can reduce the spending. And President Trump has determined that this is an agency that we can reduce the spending. We don't need to be broadcasting in all of these languages. We need to be more nimble and focus on areas where the U.S. government and where the United States needs to get a message out to people. And I think we can do a better job at it when we're nimble and smaller. And we have proof of that because our Persian team that came to work when the bombs dropped on Saturday and the president did his address, we sprung into action, we got the message out, and they said, in a way, it was easier to do that because it wasn't such a big group.
I understand that, and that makes it more nimble, and you said that in earlier comments, and so that's very much appreciated. So do you think the United States needs to fund international broadcasting operations into all of these and other countries in order to influence those populations? Do you think we have the ability to influence populations, and getting that information to those populations is worthwhile?
I think we have the ability. Information it can be used to influence people in many different forms. whether it be through social media, and governments are doing this. They're seeding narratives on social media. It's how things are done. China's doing it, Russia's doing it, America's doing it. The question is, do we need to spend the money that we are spending? Do we need to spend nearly $1 billion? Should we be spending hard-earned tax dollars supporting and sponsoring a Afghan cricket team? Should we be putting $100,000 towards sponsoring an Afghan cricket team? Is that the best use of the money? Is that what we're supposed to do with it, or are we supposed to be telling America's story abroad? There's so much misuse of public dollars in this agency that it needs to be scrapped, and we need to salvage what we can. But it's really like a rotten piece of fish. And you're looking at it and you're saying, is there anything we can pull out of here and eat? And it's best to just scrap the whole thing and start over. And I think that's the way we should go forward. That's my personal opinion.
You know, you touched on something that's dear to my heart. I never forget in the actions that I take here that someone back home is working hard to pay the taxes, to put the light bill on, and to make sure we have an office like this. And then we need to have the responsibility to oversight to make sure those dollars that are going to other countries and other places are being used efficiently and effectively. And so I really admire your approach to that. One last question. What do you really think? You know, I've heard you mention social media and some of these other aspects. What do you think is our best way forward? Do we focus more on social media, or do we, how's our best way forward for trying to communicate you know, different countries have different ways and different access to different things, but social media is becoming stronger all the time. So what's your opinion of that situation?
I think we have to move further away from, like I said, doing 1990s style television. I mean, you know, you look at President Trump communicates with the world with a simple tweet, and it's very effective, and hundreds of millions of people hear what he has to say. Joe Rogan, a one-man show, reaches hundreds of millions of people. We don't need thousands of people to tell America's story. People are telling America's story on social media. We can do it, as I said, in a more nimble way and focus on ways that we're telling it appropriately. And right now, as I said, the pro-Iranian regime coverage that's come out of this, the pro-CCP coverage that's come out of Voice of America, this thing has gotten very rotten, and we've had pro-Russian coverage coming out. We've hired Russian spies. Radio Free Europe nearly hired 20 Russian spies. If not for being tipped off, they would have had 20 Russian spies working in that outlet. And God only knows what kind of damage they could have done. These things are a waste of money. They're spending money like there's no tomorrow. Salaries are out of control. The president of RFE makes more than $320,000, I believe, and then you add all the other leadership in these various grantees. This is a hard-earned taxpayer dollar. And I think about the people who are working hard and barely make ends meet. I think about the overnight truck driver who's doing the overnight shift. I think about the teacher who's working hard and barely has time to come home and spend time with their own kids. I think about the farmer in Iowa who's working long hours and having to pay the government tax dollars. And it's going toward, for God's sakes, a cricket team in Afghanistan, and it's going to hire spies. This is outrageous, and it's got to stop. And thank God for President Trump for having the courage to
My
say,
time's up, and so I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Almo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Lake, for being here. Since its founding to counter Nazi propaganda during World War II, Voice of America has been a beacon of free information in repressive countries. Voice of America's parent agency, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, or USAGM, has provided access to the free press and information in over 50 languages around the world through radio, television, and internet programs. These programs, as you know, are often the only reliable news sources free from malign government, foreign government influence. The programs promote free thought, democratic values, and American credibility while countering authoritarian propaganda and disinformation. However, under your leadership, Ms. Lake, USAGM has been shattered. At the direction of President Trump, you cut programs, slashed funding, and tried to shutter our global news network. Now journalists are in increased danger, and reliable news is no longer accessible for millions around the world. The editor of the Russian state media network, Russia Today, celebrated your work to close Radio Free Europe, another USAGM subsidiary, saying, quote, We couldn't shut them down, unfortunately, but America did it so itself. If our adversaries are cheering this decision, why make it in the first place? Why, after decades of successful work and experts celebrating the effectiveness of these programs, would you end them? Why would you side with our adversaries who spread disinformation by removing respected programs that counter their propaganda? Maybe it's just your track record and history of attacking the media. You know, during your first failed run for public office, for governor of Arizona, you called reporters the right hand of the devil. Maybe it's because you have a history of sharing disinformation yourself. You refuse to admit, still, who won the 2020 presidential election, falsely claiming it was a rigged election. You called the January 6th insurrection here at the Capitol a staged riot. You refuse to admit you lost, both in 2022 in a gubernatorial race and in 2024 for the US Senate. The disinformation you spread during your failed campaigns were paper cuts, however, compared to the gaping wounds that will take root around the world because of your destruction of USAGM. Our adversaries are already filling the massive information hole left by USAGM. The 60 shortwave radio stations Radio Free Asia used to distribute its broadcasts have been silenced since you shut them down in March. And at the same time, China has added 80 new state media frequencies to increase the spread of their propaganda. So instead of listening to free press and trusted news from Radio Free Asia, nearly 60 million people are forced to turn to the Chinese Communist Party. The spread of CCP disinformation is alarming. In Xinjiang, where Radio Free Asia brought global attention to the Uyghur genocide, as the CCP worked overtime to hide this genocide by imprisoning Uyghur journalists, spreading propaganda, and controlling news, Radio Free Asia fought back to share the true story. The CCP tried to shut down Radio Free Asia's operations. They jammed signals and arrested and intimidated journalists and their families. It did not work. Thanks to Radio Free Asia, the world knows the truth. It was spreading in China too because they translated stories into different dialects. Or at least it was, until you took over USAGM and aided the CCP by stopping their work. That's your legacy. You told the media that you would be their worst, quote, freaking nightmare. You do seem to be a bit of a nightmare to the free press, a nightmare to the truth in general, but not our adversaries. They seem very comfortable. So I've got a simple question for you, Ms. Lake. Why are you helping authoritarian governments lie to their people?
I can see why maybe China would be upset, because they lost that VOA is slimming down, because they lost their ability to push their propaganda through the VOA, which they were doing. I don't know if you were here earlier, but the CCP...
I've been watching you. Don't worry.
The CCP has a lot of control over what kind of content VOA does. You know who doesn't have control? People running the agency. The VOA could do a hit piece on you. They could lie about you. They could put the most heinous story out about you. And guess what, Representative Amo? You couldn't pick up the phone call and say, please don't do that. It's not true. They would sue you for a firewall violation. So we got to get a handle about what message we're putting out. And sadly, it hasn't been rainbows and lollipops, okay? We've been putting out a lot of anti-America propaganda, Russian propaganda.
My time has expired.
Okay, great.
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. And I would remind my colleagues as well, it could be any one of them that was targeted by U.S. Agency of Global Media and by individuals inside of the headquarters on either side of the aisle. I look forward to hearing the results of that investigation. Chair now recognizes Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Lake, for joining us today. I think it is imperative that we recognize the challenge that VOA faces in terms of the infiltration that we've been talking about during this hearing, of the anti-American information that has been put out, whether it's pro-Russia, pro-China. All of this is problematic. And I think it's also a problem that members on this committee aren't willing to recognize that problem. If we can't all come together and recognize the fact that this organization and this agency is conflicted in many ways, I don't know how we're going to address the problem. So I appreciate the fact that you've recognized that, And your reform efforts are critical. If we want to actually advance America's interests around the world, get out this truthful information, we need to make sure that we are then going to be in a position to spend the dollars that we're appropriating for this program effectively. So the question that I have relates to two, I think, misuses of public funds. The first is about a lease. So we have a video that has been provided that shows a facility that was leased for 15 years, $250 million, $250 million of taxpayer money to lease this lavish building in downtown Washington, D.C. on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Nice.
Yet at the same time, they are still occupying the Cohen building. So tell me about this new lease and what we know about it at this point.
Well, their plan was to take this operation and move it into this building, a $250 million boondoggle that Amanda Bennett, the former CEO under Joe Biden's administration, the former CEO of USAGM, signed in this lease right before, in the fall, right before the election, to make the American taxpayers pay for this gorgeous facility. Have you ever seen a federal facility this beautiful, by the way? And there you go. You've got waterfalls, you've got Italian marble, glass, and they were going to move everybody over into this building. One slight problem, it's not set up or equipped to do any broadcasting, and this is a broadcasting agency. So we canceled that. We canceled that and tore up the lease and said we're not going to pay for that lease.
Thank you for doing that, because that is just a shocking misuse of federal funds. And if we do want to actually carry out the good work that VOA possibly could do, we need to make sure that American tax dollars are being spent appropriately and not on wasteful leases like this one. So appreciate your effort to cancel that lease. The second thing that I would like to talk about is relating to some really egregious settlements that were carried out previously for former employees of the agency. And you referenced it in your opening testimony. So I would like to hear a little bit more about this. Again, it sounds like a misuse of federal funds, and if you could share some more information on that.
I think a lot of DC lawyers figured out a quick way to make money is to sue this agency. This agency will roll over and pay off any settlement. As a matter of fact, one of our former attorneys at the agency, upon seeing how many settlements were made there, said that she's never seen so many large settlements go out in any agency. I have in this binder 19 settlements. We only picked the big ones, over $250,000 settlements. 19 $250,000 settlements were made out of USAGM in the last 5 years. A couple of them were for folks, a man named David Kligerman, who used to work for the agency. Now he works, I believe, over at Middle East Broadcasting. He left the agency after the McGuire-Woods report came out showing misspending, abuse of the agency, abuse of the federal tax dollar. And then he came back when Biden and put Amanda Bennett in, hired him back, and paid him a $650,000 settlement. His attorneys made a fortune as well. I think they figured out that they've got a compliant legal office at USAGM that will settle anything. All you got to do is sue the agency, and they'll throw tons of money your way. And that's another way they've pilfered tax dollars of the American people.
Well, I appreciate your work to highlight the waste and misuse from the last administration. When our country is trillions of dollars in debt, running multi-trillion-dollar deficits every single year, we have to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. It's finally time to do that. I'm glad this administration is taking on that effort, attacking waste and abuse of federal funds like I just talked about here. And if we actually want to get back to the mission of promoting American interests around the world, we need to do that with the tax dollars that we have available. And so these reform efforts that we're talking about today are so critically important. And I, again, want to thank you for our efforts and work with you hand in hand as we actually get back to the critical missions that this agency could provide for America and American interests around the world. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I get to my questions, I'd just like for the record to show that the USAGM reported to Congress that that so-called swanky building that you just saw pictures of would actually save the taxpayers $150 million. So let's be sure we get our facts straight as we try to
Can I respond to that?
grandstand with pictures. No,
Can I respond
I
to
have
that?
some other questions for you. Thank you. Ms. Lake, do you agree that the U.S. Agency for Global Media should be a reliable and authoritative news source?
Yes, and unfortunately, it hasn't been.
Well, I'm glad you say that because it's really not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of law. The law requires the agency to provide news which is consistently reliable and authoritative, accurate, objective, and comprehensive. Now, you criticize the agency as not doing that, but others think that the agency was doing that up until the time that Donald Trump took office. We broadcast news to hundreds of millions of people around the world and provided a crucial counterweight to the propaganda that was coming from our adversaries. Then President Trump decided to dismantle it, USAGM, with your help and all its networks. But in my view, the most ludicrous and concerning thing that has been done was to direct the agency to engage One America News to provide content for Voice of America and your other broadcasters. So I'd like to ask you, do you think UAN, One America News, is a reliable and authoritarian news source as the law requires?
Yeah, I think they do a better job than most news outlets. They cover America.
Well, let's look at some of the things that they've said, and you tell me that if you really
And by the
think
way, it was not my idea to do that. We
it's
were
under your direction and
the
from your
Office of
president,
Cuba
who you have said is
Broadcasting
so
asked
wonderful. I'm
if
surprised you're
the
not wearing a
Office of
MAGA hat
Cuba
here today. But
Broadcasting-
nonetheless, I'm
the Office
taking
of
my
Cuba
time back, and
Broadcasting
I wanna-
requested that we
I
bring
can
that
keep
in.
talking over you forever, but let's look at some of the things that the OAN did, which it was given the contract, and they're doing it, whether it's from you or from the president that you admire so. They said the leadership there told its reporters to, and I'm quoting, minimize coverage of Russian aggression. Now, do you think that's reliable and authoritative and better than other news agencies to minimize coverage of Russian aggression?
I'm not making the rundown of what airs on One America's Voice, but they have to cover, or One America News rather, they have to cover what is of interest to them and to their viewers.
But they're the ones who now have the contract to put out the news to all these different agencies that are under your direction. Shouldn't you be aware of what kind of news they're putting out?
I don't tell them what to put on the air at Voice of America because of an editorial firewall. Apparently, the CCP has more say in what goes over the air
Oh, I think
at
that's
Voice
being a
of
little
America.
ridiculous. I don't think China's over here telling OAN what they can cover. I don't think
talk to
China
some of
told
the
them
whistleblowers
to
who worked
minimize
at-
their coverage of Russian
Talk to
aggression.
some of the
Here's something else.
whistleblowers.
Let me ask you if you think this is a good coverage. Their programming for the agency, they were told also minimize coverage of the Pope because he has been making comments about climate change and advocating action. You think that's good coverage, not to cover the Pope? You think that's reliable and authoritative?
It's not my decision on what is
Well,
airing
you're
at
in
OAN.
charge. You're in charge.
I'm not
and
in charge of
You got the
OAN.
contract with these people, so it seems like it's your decision. Here's something else. The reports say that OAN instructed its employees to report only on good polls for Donald Trump, only on good polls, and they perpetuated the lie that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. That's the news
You know
that
what?
we're
They
putting
were one
out
of the
to the
only
rest of the
outlets
world
that-
under your leadership.
They were
Tell
one of
them-
the only outlets that had the courage to cover elections.
Oh, please, please. That you're going to say we're going to only cover good polls for Trump and still continue to say that the 2020 election was rigged, and that's the news we're putting out to the rest of the world, and that's the ones who have the contract.
Let me see
with
if I
you.
can pull the phone number for the person who runs OAN, and you can have a
Well, I would
conversation
hope
about
you
the
have
content.
the phone number. You're the one
I'm
who's
worried
entered
about the
into
content on
contracts with
Voice
them.
of America
If you're worried about the content,
has
then
been
why aren't you
supportive
worried
of our
about what these people
adversaries.
are saying? They're supposed to be under the law, authoritative, and reliable. And now suddenly, after knowing all these details about the number of spies and what the Chinese are doing, you don't know what OAN is doing, and that's the ones you have the contract with. I find that either...
We don't have a contract with them. We have an agreement if we want
an
to, if we want
agreement.
to
I'm
air
sorry,
their...
an agreement. And now, I can't believe that. I can't believe you know everything about all these other agreements, but not about the one that's doing the news for us, that's supposed to be reliable and can't cover the Pope, can't cover Russian aggression, which would mean Ukraine, can't cover that the election was legitimate, can't cover any negative polls for the president.
Congresswoman?
I'm
This
shocked.
is just
I
one
yield back. I
option
yield
for-
back.
It's the best news I've heard all day.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Representative Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. I think what you're seeing on display here today is the far left is sacrificing their moderate, a lot of their moderate members just to protect themselves. I think they're more important to stay in their corrupt little cocoon of power than to do what's right for this country. And I want to thank you, ma'am, for the work you've done. I noticed you were talking about real estate. I didn't have it in my notes, but I remembered in another hearing that we had in an empty building that we were renting out that Chairman Green had us, Marjorie Taylor Greene had us in the Doge subcommittee that I asked a question about do members of Congress own real estate that's being rented to the federal government, and the answer was yes. And if we had legitimate media in this country, that would have been a 60-minute story. That would have been something that would have been done over and over again. And it's clearly, and they're stealing from all of us, the left, the right, the middle, everyone. And you clearly have a record of going after political hacks, and I salute you for that, ma'am.
This town is full of them.
Yes, ma'am, it is. And I'm from Tennessee, and we're sick and tired of paying for this garbage, and I want to thank you. Is the U.S. Agency of Global Media absolutely necessary to the function of the United States?
No.
Okay. To think that we're putting out some radio show in the land of computers and internet, to me, is very antiquated. We might as well be riding a Model T down the middle of the street. Maybe it looks good and it brings back old memories, but dadgum, it's not very efficient. And I see you're more of a
It's a relic. It's
yes,
a relic.
ma'am, it is. It's a Cold War relic. And I'll ask you another question, a little more direct. There's a lady named Satara Siege. Does she work for the U.S. Agency for Global Media? Do you know?
I don't believe she works there anymore.
Okay, because in 2017, Ms. Siege was fired from the Voice of America, Persian news network, for lying on her resume, providing federal contracts to her friends, and using tax dollars for personal travel. In 2021, about 8 hours after Biden was sworn in, Ms. Siege was given a job right back at the U.S. Agency for Global Media. And during the last Congress, she and others at the U.S. Agency for Global Media actively worked to discredit a report from the committee by then-Chairman McCall, which detailed her actions and included whistleblower complaints stating she and others threatened subordinates at work. Are you aware of any other cases similar to Ms. Siege, ma'am?
Yes, a lot of the people that were implicated in that report, the McGuire-Woods report, who pilfered the American taxpayers' dollars and ran a very corrupt agency and were dismissed or left, then came back. And some of them are still holding positions, making hundreds of thousands of dollars at our grantees. This is why we're trying to do an audit of the grantees to find out where the money is going. Nearly $400 million, the hard-earned taxpayer dollars of hardworking American people are going to these grantees, and they've stonewalled us from getting any information until the 11th hour. Finally, last night, knowing I would be sitting here, they finally agreed to say, oh, we'll let you look at our books now. It's a joke, what's going on. And the joke is going to end, and we're going to bring some accountability to this agency because the people of this country are sick and tired of the crap going on in Washington, D.C. They're sick and tired of their money being spent in a way where it's not only being wasted, but where we're putting out Russian propaganda, where we're putting out CCP propaganda on Voice of America. This is a boondoggle, and it's an assault on the American people.
If I ever write a book, the title of it will be Compromised, because that's what this dadgum town is, ma'am. It is crooked as a dog's leg, and I'm glad you're doing something about it. Do you agree anyone who acts like Ms. C should be shown the door?
Absolutely, and we are showing people the door.
And I thank you for that. I come from a family of strong women. My mama flew an airplane during the Second World War. My little girl is, I got her a little late. I married her mama. She was a widow and adopted her. And she is a strong young lady. Shares a birthday with the president, just turned 18. And I hope one day she aspires to kick the hornet's nest like you've just done, ma'am, because it's a pleasure to have you where you're at. And thank you so much. And I appreciate you having to put up with all this crazy nonsense, but we got a country to save, and I hope you keep doing it.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you, ma'am.
And, you know, they've sued us. They've tried to stop us. They want to stop President Trump from making America great again. These same people who refuse to stand up and cheer for a 13-year-old boy who's battling cancer. These same people who stood on the floor of Congress and waved the Ukrainian flag after pouring $60 billion more into a war to kill more people when they wouldn't put a penny on our border. And they let our country be overrun with criminals coming into our country who are raping and killing young people and taking their lives. And now they want to try to fight President Trump every day and stop him from deporting people who came here illegally. And they want to continue running Chinese propaganda at Voice of America. I thank your mother for being a hero, for being a veteran. And I know the chairman fought valiantly for our country.
She wasn't technically a veteran. I have to clarify that.
Gentleman's
Her
time.
brother died fighting the Nazis while Daddy was off fighting the Japanese, but I'd have to clarify that just because of the fact checkers. But
Well, but
she
I
was
think
Gentleman's time is
the
expired.
gutsy little
I think
17-year-old
We have to
about-
move on to the
Okay.
next round of questioning here. Chair
but
now
there's
recognizes.
a lot of people who are rolling over in their grave right now who did die for this country.
That's right.
And when they find out that Voice of America is pushing anti-American propaganda, it's unconscionable.
Chair now recognizes Representative Dean.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just heard 3 or 4 or 5 members from the other side of the aisle say thank you for bringing reform.
You're welcome.
No, but let me finish my sentence, please, because that's not what you're bringing. They obviously didn't hear your testimony. They did not read your testimony, and I'll read part of it. And you said it again today. I was sworn in at USAGM on March 3rd, and it became clear in the following weeks, today you said in days, that reform was not possible. They missed your premise. Reform's not possible. You figured that out in days. When asked what review you had done of this very large agency, you had no answer.
I do have an
Excuse
answer.
me, this is my time. You'll wait for my questions. You then went on to say, this is filled with a bloated staff who hates America. You have been holding up photographs after photographs, including the image of the President of the United States. I feel like I am suffering through a propaganda war through your testimony. So I can see why the other side of the aisle, which is now not here, was utterly confused and congratulating you for wanting to reform this agency. No, because here's what you said. And I'm a former professor of writing. I'm somebody who is really skeptical of euphemism. You've said over and over again, you just want to reduce it to its statutory minimum. And then you said, and that it will be gone by 2026. You want it gone. The president wants it gone by 2026. I ask unanimous consent to enter onto the record this article: Moscow and Beijing rejoice at the looming death of Radio Free Europe, VOA. I ask unanimous consent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. No, that is not for you to speak to. That's what we do here. This article: Chinese propaganda surges as the U.S. defunds Radio Asia. I ask unanimous consent. Our adversaries are delighted with your plan, delighted that you'll be stripping this thing out. And I'm puzzled. My question really today is for Republican members. Think of the vaunted VOA. I have had the opportunity to visit VOA, and many of the journalists who have worked at VOA. It is something that this country has been very proud of. And yet, in your beginning testimony, you talked about, oh my goodness, USAGM, quote, hires a large number of foreign nationals, including from countries hostile to America, and uses J-1 visas as a shadow jobs and backdoor immigration program. Number one, again, propaganda, misinformation, J-1 visas are non-immigrant visas. Number two, and this is just a question of logic and basic understanding. Think about it. Many of the journalists who report through these supported networks are native to the countries in which it is critical to transmit accurate, factual, and linguistically fluent information. Of course, they should be hired. But you use as though that's a bad thing. Large number of foreign nationals, as though there's some other, as though there's a reason to demonize them. Foreign national journalists who actually understand what's going on.
We should hire American.
You know what? Voice of America is not only about talking about America, it's about reporting on the world. And millions of people for decades have relied upon it. So for those of you who think this was about reform, it's not. It's about shutting down media. If you really wanted to reform it, if you really thought there were places to change, and I'm sure there are places to improve, then you would have spent more than a few days and come to a more serious conclusion. That's my worry about you in this position. You're just not serious about it. You are a propaganda machine for the Trump administration. It is an incompetent review that you have completed. Well, actually, you didn't complete it. It sounds like you never even started it. You didn't interview anybody. You've never run an agency like this. You're a former journalist, apparently, allegedly. Although I don't trust your journalistic integrity when you hold up a single picture of a newsroom at a single moment in time and think that reveals anything. It reveals nothing. It's evidence of nothing. I don't know if they all just went to lunch. Who knows what that's a picture of?
you ever
Your
worked in a
journalistic
newsroom?
integrity, I've been to many newsrooms. Your journalistic integrity is shot. My son has an expression that he taught me years ago, that trust and credibility is gained in drops and poured out in buckets. Sadly, you have poured out that trust and credibility over years. But I see why Mr. Trump put you in this position. He doesn't want a free press. He doesn't want Americans, soldiers across this globe hearing the facts of what's going on. He doesn't want our adversaries to actually know what's going on. Look at what we're up to today. We can't get the facts. We can't even get a briefing on an attack by the United States using our exquisite military expertise from the President of the United States and those who put it forward. We can't get at the facts. All we're getting is propaganda. Totally obliterated the nuclear program of Iran. We have to rely upon that as our news source. I'll be going to a SCIF to try to get whatever little information we can. But honest to goodness, I have no question for you because you don't have any credibility. You have misled this other side of the aisle with some notion of reform when you even say you don't want reform. You just want to collapse the doggone thing. You fired people. You let people go. You misled this committee, worrying about who was vetting the hires. You didn't bother to say that in 2018 to 2021, the new hires were vetted by DOD. You've misled this committee. You're misleading America. You did it in your own state through your own elections. You did it with the presidential election. You've lost your credibility. You've poured it out in buckets, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Any way I can respond to some of that?
I didn't.
I can? Okay, well, let's start. I agree that we have an exquisite military. I've never heard it referred to by that, and I think that you would have been fighting, and hopefully you were fighting, Representative, when our military were being summarily fired because they didn't want to get an experimental shot. So hopefully you were sitting in that chair, standing up for the men and women in our military, being fired from the military. And hopefully you are opposed to the CCP propaganda that has snuck in to the VOA. But I'm not sure if you are. And you talk about, you talk about me being upset that we're hiring foreign nationals.
Madam Chairwoman, I really am not asking for any response, so I would ask that this stop. I don't know whose time she is on.
Thank you very much. I now recognize myself to ask questions, and I want to thank the committee chairman Best and ranking member of this committee for holding today's hearing. And I want to thank you, Kari, Ms. Lake, for joining us today as we work to reform USAGM to its intended purpose as a national security tool. And I know some of my colleagues have already mentioned this as well, but these past few days, the world has been watching the Israel-Iran conflict. And as Iranian audiences are desperate for critical information, the digital content from VOA's Radio Farda has surged with noteworthy spikes in viewership. Meanwhile, North Korea's state-run newspaper, the Nodong Shinmun, condemned the United States for the recent U.S. strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Without reporting from the outside world through VOA and RFA, most North Korean civilians only see the United States as the bad guy who, with no factual background or understanding of the risk of the nuclear development. So I worry about the US government's ability to win in the information domain during the next crisis, which could be just around the corner. For example, Taiwan Strait crisis, is the United States able to rapidly disseminate information and counter Chinese disinformation without entities like RFA, who have had a long-standing and unique presence in the region? I acknowledge that we need accountability and transparency within USAGM and among the grantee organizations, but we need to accomplish this with measured congressional review and reform that does not unintentionally cede ground to our adversaries. So let me ask you first line of questioning related to the retaining the critical functions of VOA. With the recent events in the Middle East, we saw a last-minute scramble to bring back VOA Farsi-speaking staff who are on administrative leave. Meanwhile, dramatic cuts to RFE, RL, Radio Liberty have crippled the Persian language service to Radio Farda. The USAGM reorganization terminated over 1,400 positions at Voice of America and spurred massive layoffs at the grantee organizations. So did you and your team have any concerns about how these terminations would severely limit the US government's ability to support the flow of accurate information abroad? Could you explain why or why not?
I don't think it will limit our ability to tell America's story abroad. And we are doing that. And you said scrambled to bring people in. I wouldn't say scramble. I think when breaking news happens, if you've been in a newsroom, you get, there's a much, you could call it scrambling if you choose, but basically when breaking news happens, it's all hands on deck. And these professionals came back in and they're still with us and they're still employed. And they got to work as you do in a newsroom, especially when news happens and it's not at their normal time where they would normally be in. You come into the newsroom and you cover the story, and that's what we're going to do. We can do it with a smaller staff. This newsroom should have been downsized a long time ago, but because it's the federal government and they don't believe in downsizing at all, it hasn't happened. Too many people were working in the newsroom, and we've shrunk that down in order to meet the president's statutory his requirement to bring it down to statutory minimum.
Okay, let me get to the next line of questioning regarding the grantees then. The RFA has been vital in countering the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda, whether it was exposing the CCP's ridiculous attempts to blame the US for the COVID-19 pandemic or uncovering the Uyghur genocide to the world that left RFA Uyghur service reporters and their families vulnerable to CCP harassment. USAGM's journalists have spent decades building credibility and trust with audiences that have grown dramatically in recent decades. With the reorganization, however, the grantees have had to let go of a significant portion of their employees and are unable to effectively fulfill their mission. So what strategy can you explain to us do you have in place to ensure we preserve the respective missions, the talents, the functions, and on-the-ground expertise of the grantee organizations?
Well, a lot of what the grantees are doing was duplicitous of what we're doing at VOA. Why do we need RFA to be doing a Mandarin news service when we at VOA are doing Mandarin? Why do we need to have taxpayers pay for that? And also, we don't have a grant agreement, a current grant agreement. We're working to get one, and they have not been cooperative. You know, the grant agreement that was in place, that the Biden administration put in place with these folks, had no transparency, and we don't have a current approved financial plan from these grantees either. And then they choose to sue us. They choose to sue us in the middle of this.
My understanding, the VOA operation is pretty much gone.
No, it's not
no
gone.
people there.
We're doing what is statutorily required, the statutory minimum. President Trump put forth in his executive order to bring this agency to its statutory minimum functions. And Mandarin happens to be one of those statutorily required languages. And we have a staff, I believe we have about 15 people we will be staffing for our Mandarin coverage. And you mentioned if something were to happen, a big news story were to break, we would surge people over. This is how newsrooms operate. For example, in an American newsroom, when the elections happen, you surge people in to cover, you put more reporters on covering the elections because it's a big story. And then when there aren't elections, you have fewer people covering elections. When there's an earthquake, you surge people over. We have pulled back $17.3 million from the grantees. We're going to use that money to surge operations for news coverage when need be.
Well, I agree that we have to have efficient operations, but the point that I'm trying to make is that we have let go of journalists that have spent decades building their credibility and trust with our audiences that are listening and relying on RFA, RFE, RL. I just want to make sure that those talents are not eliminated, and we are able to bring them back as soon as possible. And again,
well, we're paying
Go
RFA.
on.
We've paid them. I mean, I don't know what they're doing with their money. I do know they're suing us with their money. I'm not sure what they're doing. We're paying RFA, and if they're firing their workers, then that's on them. But this agency spends $950 million. $400 million is going to these grantees, and we paid them.
in the interest of time, I know we're way over time. I do want to recognize Mr. Johnson, Rep. Johnson from Texas. Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Lake.
Hi.
So I want to address a couple things that was just recently said. Representative Burchett was trying to imply with his questioning of you that it's just Voice of America is a relic. I just looked it up, and 354 million people listen to it every week. So I would hardly qualify or classify that as a relic.
Those are government numbers, and I don't
so-
trust those numbers.
Well, that's a sad state of affairs when you don't trust the government that you're representing and that you're working for and an agency that you're in charge of. That's a pathetic statement to tell the American people that you don't trust the government that you're leading. So next,
The most American
this is
people
my
don't
time,
trust
ma'am.
this government.
This is my time. And so, and Representative Kim, I share your concerns. I was comforted to hear that she expressed concerns to you that, quote, I wrote it down, she worries about the U.S. ability to win the information war going forward. And I share that concern. I'm very concerned that we are ceding ground. In her own statement, she said that the Voice of America is vital in contradicting the CCP China propaganda, and I completely
But it's
concur
sharing
with her.
CCP propaganda.
So, no, we are countering their propaganda. So I have some questions. You know, I just want to make sure that I have the record correct and I have your statements correct. You have called the Voice of America anti-American propaganda, correct? And I think you're implying that today. Is that right?
They have put forth propaganda from other countries. Sadly, I'm very sad about that.
And you do consider Voice of America to be a biased agency, is that correct?
They have been, yes.
Okay. And you agree that the characterization of Voice of America's track record is unsalvageable and appalling, is that correct?
Pardon me?
You think that the Voice of America's track record is unsalvageable, correct?
I think that this agency, U.S. Agency for Global Media, is unsalvageable, that we can pull parts that are decent and we could work with, and that would be VOA.
Yeah,
And
and
we
the
bring it
thing
in.
that's so stunning is that this is an exact set of messaging put out by the Chinese, that VOA is a frontline propaganda tool. VOA is widely recognized as Washington's carefully crafted propaganda machine. This is Chinese propaganda that you are
you're right.
restating as
VOA
an
is
American
putting out
official.
Chinese
No,
propaganda.
excuse me, but that is absolutely outrageous. That what is happening now is that the Trump administration has gone from 71 employees to 2. 71 to 2 of the people running Voice of America in China.
That's
and
not
now
true.
we have a situation
That's
where
not
you
true.
are essentially parroting the Chinese propaganda. It's for the dismantling of Voice of America. So what do we have? We have the Trump administration cutting all service personnel of this agency. We have the head of the Trump administration who's over this agency parroting Chinese propaganda. And all we are doing is ceding America's critical voice. We are the counterbalance in the world of democracy against China, against North Korea, against Russia. The Americans, the United States government. We are the voice. We are the voice of democracy. We are the voice that the world relies on for accurate information, just as Representative Kim implied in Iran. She's a member of the opposing party. This is Republican and a Democrat agreeing that the Voice of America is critical, and you are gutting it, dismantling. If you had concerns, why don't you just fire the people who are giving information you don't agree with and hire some others? Why are you just throwing the entire agency out, ceding America's role in the world of information to the Chinese, our enemy of disinformation? You know, we have had multiple hearings of this committee, multiple, being very concerned over propaganda and disinformation that the Chinese are propagating in our country and throughout the world. And instead of stepping it up and fighting harder and bringing American might to the fight and the truth of what we believe in, we're saying, take it. You can have it all. We're just going to go away because we don't believe what we're doing anymore. And that is absolutely outrageous. We are ceding all of our soft power in the world to our adversaries because the Trump administration doesn't believe in accurate truth. And I just cannot for the life of me figure out why it is that you want to do it. It's just unconscionable to me, and unfortunately, I'm out of time. I yield back.
Maybe you should run for president. Because
I'm a member of Congress, and I'm very happy where I am. Thank you.
Okay. Well, because the president won with an overwhelming mandate, and the president has the right to put forth an executive order, and I have the duty to effectuate that executive
We have
order, and I'm
roles
doing
and
that.
responsibility of oversight as members of Congress, and that is exactly
have a
what we're doing. And
responsibility
I
to
don't
the
think the
American
president
taxpayer?
campaigned to cede all of American propaganda, all of American information to the Chinese. I don't think that that is exactly what he
Well, we're
ran
gonna
on. I don't
stop
think
the
that's
Chinese
what the American people
propaganda
voted
from
for.
being aired
so I
on
disagree
Voice of
with you
America.
completely.
I can see
I
that.
guess my time is out. So thank you.
Chair now recognizes Representative Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Lake, thank you. I appreciate your testimony. It's become clear that one of our most urgent concerns is how our own taxpayer-funded outlets like USAGM, VOA, OCB, and their grantees appear to be churning out, spreading content that doesn't just look down on America, but actively works against our national security and vital interest. This is a betrayal, and if it's happening, it's not just problematic, but it's a deep-rooted corruption that needs to be exposed and rooted out. In light of this, I have just a few questions. Are you aware of any instances where VOA or its grantees have misled their audience or provided false information?
There are a lot of cases where that has happened. I mean, if you just look at the political bias, I would say that you're misleading. I'm gonna throw one case out because people will remember this video, and it was of Robert De Niro, the actor who has really seemed to go off the deep end lately, putting out a rant against the president, and he called him all kinds of things, a dog and awful things. Said he wanted to punch him in the face. That video was played on VOA Ukraine for the audiences in Ukraine to see, to make them believe that that was the sentiment of the American people. when Joe Biden literally failed and practically fell on his face in the debate, when all of a sudden the Democrats realized, okay, we got a problem here, and we're going to have to acknowledge that Joe Biden has serious cognitive problems, VOA wouldn't even report that. They made it sound like his debate was fine. Only days later did they come in and try to make up ground. You can talk about the October 7th terrorist attack in Israel, refusing to call that a terrorist attack, refusing to call the terrorist who inflicted that kind of carnage on Israel terrorist. I could go on and on, but you look at the waste that they have perpetuated against the American people, the $850,000 spent on a New York concert. Why are we spending money that's meant for putting our American message out on a concert in New York? Why are we doing that? When I first got in, one of the first things that came across my email was a complaint that we had a cross-dressing man reporting in VOA to the Pakistan audience. Why are we putting a cross-dressing man on the air to tell America's story in Pakistan? We got to get things right. This is insane. It's completely out of control. And the chairman said, I can't remember the exact figure. I think he said the iHeartRadio has a budget of about 80 or 90 million. This is a nearly $1 billion budget, and we're putting out, in many cases, schlock, something that's unwatchable, and worse yet, that's un-American, pro-CCP, that is supporting our enemies. It's unconscionable that we would do that.
I would agree with that, and so would my district. And moving on, have you encountered any situations where VOA or its grantees have promoted or reported anti-American sentiment? And I think you just touched on that briefly.
And I'm happy to pull more. If you don't mind, I'd be happy to pull more examples of that, and we can submit it to you later.
Okay, and just in looking at it from a different perspective, are you aware of any cases where VOA or its grantees have promoted propaganda from an adversarial nation?
Yes, and I think I've made that clear today. We have CCP influence where literally folks over at the Chinese embassy are telling the folks at VOA how to cover China. That's one example.
Those are very concerning. Thank you very much for your response, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Shaw.
Ms. Lake, over and over and over again, Russian propagandists tell us you can't trust the VOA. They're a phony organization. They tell a lot of lies. And you are here today repeating that Russia propaganda point. Again and again and again, Chinese government agents tell their people, do not believe the voice of America. They tell lies, and you are here repeating that Chinese propaganda point. What's particularly illustrative is my colleague said, you know, you have 300 to 400 million listeners per week nationwide, worldwide, and you said you can't trust that number. It comes from the government. That number is quite consistent with the numbers issued by the Trump administration in 2017 and 2018. Everybody in this room knows that I don't trust Donald Trump. Now they know you don't trust Donald Trump. Having administered that agency for 4 years, issues numbers as to how many listeners they have, and you say don't trust them.
That's because
Now, excuse me, it's my time.
The Trump.
Ms. Lake, do you know the rules here? Follow the rules. Now, you had your opening statement. This is my 5 minutes. Mr. Putin wants to weaken America. There are those in America who want to help him. Those who want to help Putin know that they can't just scuttle an American aircraft carrier. So they're trying to do something that is far more dangerous to our role in the world and our national security, and that is to scuttle our international broadcasting. Now, we have a bipartisan Armenian caucus, 2 chairs, 2 co-chairs. You have eliminated all Armenian language broadcasting. Did you consult with any of the chairs or co-chairs of the Armenian caucus in Congress before you cut off that broadcasting? That's a yes or no question.
Nope.
That's how decisions are made. And I'm sure you didn't consult with the U.S. ambassador in Yerevan either. I'd like unanimous consent to put in the record a report from the U.S. Office of Special Counsel detailing the terrible administration of USAGM during the latter months of the Trump administration. I'll point out that Ms. Lake tells us how terrible it is that she can't get information. You know who really needs information? Congress. You know who's sitting behind you? Mr. Michael Pack, the former under Trump director, same job you have, who we had to try to subpoena to come here and give Congress information, and we got stonewalled. But had we had Mr. Pack here, in your testimony, you talk about how there's waste, and we would have detailed all the waste of your Trump-appointed predecessor, and how the $1.6 million of personnel claims that you cite occurred chiefly under the Trump administration. So you're here basically saying that you don't think that we can't have international broadcasting because you can't run it. The idea that you say, well, China is telling Voice of America how to broadcast. Of course you try to interview Chinese diplomats. You interview members of Congress. That does not mean, I tell all the LA Times what they should do all the time. They tend not to listen. Every journalist is given advice by everybody in the world all the time. Now, I think Ms. Kim did a good job of illustrating the problems with closing down our broadcasting efforts. Our soft power is of critical importance, and I think Putin would be very happy. Now, as I pointed out, there are many settlements of due to law breaking and violations that you cite, and of course, they occurred back in 2020 under Mr. Pax. No wonder he refused the subpoena. No wonder he wouldn't testify here. No, I will give you credit. You're here. And you're here defending the indefensible, which is that America should be silent on the world stage. Our ability, bombs are powerful. Truth is more powerful. Taking the bombs away from our military would be bad. Taking truth away from our public diplomacy efforts is worse. I yield back.
I now recognize my colleague from Arizona, Congressman Hamadeh.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I want to thank Chairman Bass for allowing me to wave into this committee, and Ms. Lake. It's hard to say Ms. Lake. I know you as Kari, and so does
You can call me
everybody
Kari.
So does everybody in Arizona. And Kari, for everything you had to endure in this committee hearing, especially not just here, but what you had to endure in 2022. And I know you're a fighter for the truth. We all know what happened with our elections in 2020 and 2022 and the tentacles of the Communist Chinese Party, which has just been reported by John Solomon and how they were trying to impact the 2020 election. I know FBI Director Kash Patel is trying to get to the bottom of it. It's scary that they've infiltrated so many aspects of our government and especially the Voice of America. And right here in the Congress, I don't know if you knew this, but the China Daily newspaper was actually being distributed all across Congress and every single office. And I helped lead the charge to ban the China Daily newspaper from being distributed in the halls of Congress, which I'm proud of. But it concerns me that the Chinese have infiltrated the Voice of America and they were having meetings at the embassy. Can you expand on what access did the Communist Chinese have within Voice of America?
Well, they have more say, this is sad, over editorially what VOA and puts out than someone like me who's been charged with helping to oversee this agency because of an editorial firewall. Key lead management and leadership at U.S. Agency for Global Media cannot have focus in or tell the folks what they should be covering at Voice of America. Unfortunately, the CCP can. And I read this a little bit earlier, but and I don't know if I should read it again, but they're literally were attending meetings at the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. And this is a report that I find rather shocking, and I mentioned it Starting in the first decade of 2000, the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., and the leadership of VOA's Mandarin service began an annual meeting to allow embassy officials to voice their opinions about VOA's content. They even convinced the former leadership during Biden's administration to cut short an interview. They wanted the whole thing canceled. They convinced VOA leadership to cut short an interview with a whistleblower who was critical of the CCP. And this just continues. This is an article that came out, I believe it was in March. VOA's senior executives frequently traveled to China, attending state-sponsored events and meeting with Chinese embassy officials. These meetings weren't casual diplomatic exchanges. They involved soliciting feedback on VOA's programming. Congressman Hamadeh, if VOA decided to run a hit piece on you, and it was full of lies, and they called you and told you they were going to run that, and you wanted to say, hey, let's clear this up because that's not true, this isn't true, and I suggest you don't run the story, they could sue you for a firewall violation. But yet, a CCP official can tell them how to run the news.
It's very dangerous, and I know we know how corrupt some of these courts are, and I know that there is a big challenge right now trying to stop the authority that you have and trying to reform the VOA. And you got to win this battle because President Trump needs this in order to make America great again. And
apparently, there are judges who want to run an agency rather than be judges. And you know, my suggestion to those judges, if they really want to run an agency, go to usajobs.gov and apply for a job.
Well, we know many of them are politicians in black robes. Kari, I want to talk about after President Trump's successful strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities, he put out a post on X that had it translated his speech in Farsi. So you were able to do that with the statutory minimums within the VOA?
Yes, we were. And it wasn't a scramble, as many said. It was typical breaking news where you jump in when news happens. And our team, our Persian team, were able to jump in when news broke, when the bombs hit, and we were in place, ready to go when President Trump delivered his historic address. We had it broadcast on the air and digitally as well, online, and it was translated simultaneously in Farsi. Even though some people said we didn't do that, we in fact did. There's a lot of lies out there, and unfortunately people, some of the Democrats in this room believe the lies, or they know they're lies and they want to repeat them. But we were live on the air. That is, I think, what I heard from one of the members on our team, the most people saw that tweet than any other tweet that we've ever done on VOA Farsi.
Incredible. Well, thank you, Ms. Lake, for being here, and thank you for always fighting for the truth. And in many ways, I wouldn't be here in Congress without your help and your support. So thank you again, Kari.
Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank you, Ms. Lake, for your testimony today. At this point, we're going to do closing statements. I think we covered a lot of ground here today. You spoke about a number of different concerning things, from what's going on with lawfare to foreign nationals being hired and given access and not actually being vetted, to facilities being empty and not used, and individuals that have worked for our adversaries, even though they were supposed to be expressing the sentiments of America. It's sad that it was not bipartisan to bring up those issues, but only to attack you. I do want to give the minority side an opportunity to offer any closing statement, because maybe they want to bring it up now.
We cleared the room.
I don't want them to say I didn't give them a chance, because that'll happen later.
Yeah.
I guess the minority doesn't have anything else that they want to say. Ms. Lake, for my closing statement, I'm going to give you the opportunity to take my time and express any other sentiments that you feel like you didn't have the opportunity to express, any other information that you'd like to put out, and then we'll close down this hearing.
Well, I want to thank you, Chairman Mast, for allowing me to come and speak about the Voice of America, U.S. Agency for Global Media. America has an incredible story to tell. Unfortunately, it hasn't been told properly or positively on Voice of America for a long time. And I'd like to see that change. We have so much that we should be telling the world, and we shouldn't be putting CCP propaganda, Russian propaganda, Iranian regime propaganda on our airwaves that the taxpayers are paying for. This is nearly $1 billion agency. We know for a fact money is being wasted. We know that the content going out is not supportive of this great country. Yet the great people of this country are being forced to pay for it. And thankfully, President Trump has come into office and said, I want to make sure we scale back this out-of-control bloat in the federal bureaucracy. And I don't take pleasure in people losing their jobs, but I will tell you, in the media landscape, the trends have been newsrooms are getting smaller. We don't need as many people. Where it used to take a team of 6 or 7 to get a story out in a live shot, one person can do that now. I mean, I mentioned Joe Rogan. He reaches hundreds of millions of people with each of his podcasts, and he doesn't have a staff of 1,100 or 1,200 people doing that. Unfortunately, in the government, they don't like the word modernize, and they haven't modernized in this agency. 15,000 people in media have lost their jobs in 2024. 15,000 broadcast media employees lost their jobs due to downsizing. We can't continue to operate at the level that we're continuing at. And President Trump has asked us to bring this agency down to its statutory minimum, and he's calling for eliminating the agency starting in the fiscal year 2026, which begins in October. And I'm going to work to effectuate that. You know, I could be selfish and say, I don't want to end an agency because I'm working in it. I'm happy to do what the president has asked us to do. We need to start scaling back some of the waste. And I do think it's wasteful to spend money at an agency that's supposed to be telling America's story that is not telling America's story. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that we stop running CCP propaganda, that we start putting the true story of America forward as much as I can in the coming months. So thank you so much for giving us an opportunity. And I wanted to be respectful to everybody. Unfortunately, I didn't think that some of the questions really came forth to prod and find out what's happening and how we can make it better. But hopefully I was able to provide some answers.
We appreciate your testimony today. And I would simply add to that, we can accomplish today with any one given phone what it used to take a team of people to do, a camera person with a tripod and a 20-pound camera and a reporter and somebody holding a microphone and a news truck to broadcast that. Any one of us and any individual across the globe can now conduct that with something that most of us carry in our pocket. That's the difference in the world today as to just a decade ago.
That's right.
In that, I would say this, pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 legislative days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to length limitations. Without objection, this committee stands adjourned.
The Subcommittee on South Central Asia will come to order, and the purpose of this hearing is to examine the fiscal year 26 President's budget request for the Bureau of Industry and Security. This hearing will serve as an opportunity for members to examine the Bureau of Industry and Security's critical and growing role in the U.S., ensuring that we win the AI arms race against the Chinese Communist Party. All right, today's hearing will examine the fiscal year 2026 budget request for the Bureau of Industry and Security, an agency whose mission is critical to ensuring America wins the AI arms race against the Communist Party of China. We are at a historic inflection point. Technologies that will define the 21st century, such as AI, biotechnology, and quantum computing, are achieving breakthroughs that increasingly sound more like science fiction than the reality that we're used to. These technologies have a potential to unlock tremendous economic prosperity, medical innovations, and human flourishing. However, they are not just drivers of economic growth, they are instruments of military power and security as well. Advanced AI models could coordinate fleets of self-driving cars in Michigan. They could also direct autonomous drone swarms over the Taiwan Strait. The nation that leads in developing and deploying these technologies has an opportunity to gain geopolitical advantages for decades to come. The CCP understands this. That's why it's trying to dominate these critical technologies by any means necessary through state subsidies, forced tech transfers, economic espionage, chip smuggling, and exploiting access to the West's most innovative AI labs and universities. AI dominance is central to the CCP's goals. Its military modernization efforts, surveillance state, and human rights abuses are amplified by AI. Export controls play a crucial role in ensuring the U.S. and allied technologies are not, the U.S. and allied technologies are not used to fuel the CCP's pursuit of global dominance. Amongst its many important roles, BIS serves as a guardian of one of the world's most valuable and powerful supply chains, the ecosystem of advanced chips, tools, components, and design software that underpins the development of cutting-edge artificial intelligence. China's leading AI companies have made it clear just how dependent their future is on U.S. technology. In response to a question on what their biggest obstacle to AI development is, DeepSeek's CEO put it bluntly, quote, "Bans on shipments of advanced chips are the problem," close quote. The CCP understands the importance of these AI choke points. That's why it's working around the clock to steal chips and exploit export control loopholes to internalize its production. That's why this hearing today is so important. BIS fiscal 26 budget request includes a 133% increase in enforcement funding, a bold and necessary step. As the DeepSeek CEO made evident, it's not a lack of talent holding back China's AI development, it's the lack of access to U.S. technology. That's what this budget supports. It allows BIS to better disrupt covert efforts to funnel U.S. innovation to the CCP's military and surveillance state. So let's be very clear. Enforcement is not about punishing innovation, it's about protecting it. It's about making sure that the technologies that define the future are not weaponized against our values, our alliances, or our own people. We also recognize that BIS operates in a dynamic and challenging environment. The technologies we're discussing are evolving rapidly. BIS must become faster, more adaptive, and more technologically capable than ever before. This subcommittee is committed to giving the Bureau the tools and resources it needs to meet that challenge head-on. The geopolitical struggle between America and China defines the technologies of our time. Global AI development shaped by democratic values or authoritarian control will depend on the decisions we make right now about licensing, enforcement, and strategic technology protection. I'm pleased that we are joined by Undersecretary Jeffrey Kessler, who leads BIS during this decisive period in history. Mr. Kessler, thank you for your service and your appearance here at the subcommittee. The window for preserving America's technology edge is narrow, but it does remain open. BIS, with the support of Congress, must ensure America wins the AI arms race. Chair now recognizes the ranking member from California, Representative Kamlager-Dove, for any statement she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Undersecretary Kessler, for being here today. It is mid-June, and you are the very first administration witness to testify before a House Foreign Affairs Committee this Congress. So I hope the rest of the administration can follow your example. Today, we will examine the fiscal year 26 budget request for BIS and discuss the role of export controls within the larger national security objective of ensuring U.S. leadership in the global AI race. I say U.S. leadership because California, my state, is the #1 source of semiconductor manufacturing facilities and jobs in this country. These equities are very important to me and all of us. Over the past decade, export controls administered by BIS have become an increasingly divisive tool in U.S. foreign policy. Decisive. Today, BIS is responsible for restricting the PRC's access to the advanced AI semiconductor chips powering China's military and technological advancements. It is also tasked with enforcing an extensive multilateral export controls regime on Russia in response to its unprovoked invasion of a democratic Ukraine. Yet despite its centrality to two critical national security priorities, BIS's resources have not kept pace to meet the demands of its responsibilities. Since 2010, BIS's budget for core export control functions has remained relatively flat, while the number of license applications has nearly doubled, from 20,000 a year in 2012 to over 40,000 a year in 2024. I am glad to see the significant funding increase for BIS in the President's budget, which must also be accompanied by increased responsiveness to Congress and greater congressional oversight. These resources will help ensure that the export controls needed to prevent the PRC from accessing leading-edge chips and chip manufacturing equipment can be effectively enforced. However, I'm concerned that robust export controls cannot make up for the immense damage this administration is doing to America's competitiveness in AI. To win the AI race, we can't just slow China down. We have to simultaneously speed up and sustain our lead in cutting-edge technology. Yet Trump's budget would upend the federal R&D that is an essential enabler of the semiconductor technology pipeline. The President's budget slashes the National Science Foundation's research funding for microelectronics and semiconductors by 54%. NIST, which supports foundational research to commercialize new developments in semiconductor technology, would be cut by 28%, after hundreds of employees working on semiconductor policies were doged. The Department of Energy's Office of Science, which supports national labs and the development of advanced manufacturing processes for semiconductors in the United States, is getting a 14% reduction. Not to mention the administration's culture war against universities and its draconian immigration policies, including the deployment of the National Guard in my home city of downtown LA right now, creating a perilous environment for the high-skilled foreign talent we are dependent on to make up the semiconductor workforce shortage. Trump doesn't need to force a repeal of the CHIPS Act, which has been essential to boosting domestic chip manufacturing, to hurt our advancements in AI. Turning back to BIS, I'm concerned that Trump is treating export controls as a bargain.
The senator from Connecticut.
As we dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. The U.S. Constitution and the American people give the American president vast power. The power to decide how billions of dollars are spent, the power to oversee the entire federal criminal justice system, the power to sell arms around the world, to deploy millions of American soldiers, to negotiate peace treaties. We give him these powers, the Constitution gives the president these powers, so that he uses them on our behalf to deploy that vast power of the American presidency to increase our quality of life, to protect the American people. We place immense trust in the president not to abuse these incredible authorities that are given to him. But Donald Trump is abusing that authority in ways that honestly shock the conscience. Donald Trump is using the power of his office not to help or protect us, but to enrich himself and his family. He is doing it publicly, brazenly, out in the open. He is, in effect, daring us, specifically daring the legislative branch, the co-equal branch, to stop him. Nearly 3 weeks ago, news broke that the White House had dialed up one of our key allies in the Middle East, the government of Qatar, and it asked that the Qataris give the president a luxury jet that is reportedly worth upwards of $400 million. Now, the nicest jet that I have ever been on is Air Force One, and it's really nice. But the jet that Trump wants to make Air Force One, that he's asking for from the Qataris, makes Air Force One, the current version, look like a tenement house. The Qatari jet that he is asking for, its interior is designed by a famed French designer, complete with a flowing grand staircase, sculpted ceilings, plush carpeting, leather couches, gold furnishings. The plane has been called the world's most luxurious private jet. It includes 9 bathrooms, 5 kitchens, swanky lounges, and a master bedroom suite. Now, the arrangement that Trump proposed to the Qataris would briefly pass the jet through U.S. government hands, but only as reported for just a year or two before it would end up belonging personally to Donald Trump. The U.S. government would essentially be a straw purchaser. The real owner of the jet, for all practical purposes, would be Donald Trump. Now, this kind of gift, a $400 million luxury jet, it has no precedent in American history. No president has ever asked for, never mind been given, a $400 million gift from a foreign nation. Why? Well, because presidents know that that's crossing a line. That is a massive abuse of their power. The leverage that presidents have over other countries that they could use to ask for millions of dollars in gifts, it's supposed to be used to benefit the nation's security, not to enrich themselves. But also, it's just illegal. There is a very specific clause in the Constitution that forbids this kind of gift from a foreign government to a president. And this body is supposed to be in charge of helping to enforce the Constitution. Our founders wrote that clause into the Constitution because they worried about this exact situation, where a president is using his authority like a monarch or a king to make himself the richest person in the world. Now, the Qatar government feels like it had little choice but to say yes when asked for this $400 million gift. Again, briefly to the U.S. government, but really, for all practical purposes, to the president. They felt like they had no choice precisely because an American president has so much power. They have so much leverage, especially over a vulnerable country in the Middle East. In this case, Qatar really needs to keep the United States on its side. Middle East politics, they shift really quickly, and during Trump's first term, when the Qataris were not close to Trump, they paid a price. They found themselves badly and dangerously isolated in the region. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, if you remember, effectively ganged up to blockade Qatar, and Trump gave that move implicit consent. Qatar, frankly, is willing to pay a very high price to avoid that fate again. But Qatar also has things that it wants from the United States. No Middle East country has ever been allowed to buy MQ-9 Reaper drones. These are the most lethal armed drone that America makes. We have previously judged that the region is just too volatile to allow any nation to possess the Reaper. And arguably, there's an arms control regime that doesn't allow us to transfer that technology. But Qatar wanted to break that precedent. And of course they did. They wanted to be the first nation to have the Reaper technology, and Trump seemed willing to go along. So a $400 million gift to the president, again, that the president was asking for, it's a relatively small price to pay for that kind of military edge over your rivals in the region. But there was one more reason that Qatar had no choice but to give Trump, or at least they felt they had no choice but to give Trump this wildly illegal gift. Because Trump had made it clear to the whole region, to the whole of the Gulf region in the Middle East, that he was for sale and that preferential American treatment was for sale. And if Qatar didn't pay, another country would. Qatar wasn't going to be protected, frankly, by a collective refusal of Trump's extortion in the region, and they had only to look next door to the United Arab Emirates to see how high the price was getting to win Trump's affection. At the exact moment that Trump was leaning on Qatar to give him the luxury plane, he was also leaning on UAE to give him not a $400 million gift, but a $2 billion gift. And he didn't have to lean hard. Just before the Qataris committed to give Trump the plane, an investment firm backed by the Emirati government and chaired by the Emirati government's national security advisor shocked the world and announced that it would use Trump's brand new stablecoin, this is a form of cryptocurrency, in a $2 billion investment deal that this investment fund, essentially an arm of the UAE government, was doing. And because of that $2 billion deal, overnight, Trump's stablecoin became one of the 5 largest stablecoins in the world, massively inflating the president's wealth due to this one single investment. Now, this wasn't an ordinary investment decision. Out of all the stablecoin companies in the world, the Emiratis chose what at the time was a brand new, relatively small crypto company run by 2 people who had very little background in the industry. Why? To put money directly into the pocket of Donald Trump. On the website of World Liberty Financial, that's the
say that the grift is over. It's not that USAGM has never provided any value. It's that USAGM had drastically lost their way and allowed themselves to become a source of espionage. However, it's clear that USAGM cannot continue to operate as it has in recent times. Drastic measures have to be taken to ensure that every taxpayer dollar works for where those dollars come from. The American people, not Xi Jinping, not Vladimir Putin, not the Ayatollah. I want to thank our witness, Kari Lake, for appearing in front of this committee today. I'm looking forward to hearing your testimony. I'm looking forward to a productive and probably a rowdy discussion about the Trump administration's vision for the future of U.S. broadcasting. And in that, I'm going to recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Meeks, for any opening statement that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Lake, I thank you for joining us today. First, I'd like to address President Trump's recent strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, an action taken without consulting the committee or securing congressional authorization. And it's troubling that Secretary Rubio is not sitting here today, and that Republican members are avoiding oversight on such grave matters of war and peace that fall squarely on this committee's jurisdiction. Instead, as this hearing's title shows, we're returning to House Republicans' fixation on far-fetched conspiracies, this time to tear down the U.S. Agency for Global Media and the important work it supports. This tracks with President Trump's broad record of denigrating federal agencies and appointing leaders that, far from shepherding their agencies to success, are stewards of their sabotage. And I believe, Ms. Lake, you fall into this category. The story of the United States Agency for Global Media began with the Voice of America countering Nazi propaganda. That mission endured through the Cold War and continues today. USAGM is mandated to reach heavily censored countries with trusted information because Congress recognized that factual reporting contributes to international peace and stability and is in the interest of the United States of America. The irony that USAGM is now being undone under a banner of disinformation is not lost on me. Worse, some Republicans want it to be transformed into every propaganda machine we oppose abroad. The Trump administration's short-sighted dismantling of USAGM echoes its attacks on the U.S. Agency for International Development, spinning false narratives about corruption and waste to dismantle effective institutions Congress established with bipartisan support. Ms. Lake, if it was your goal at USAGM to use falsehood to advance an agenda, I believe then you're qualified for this job. Your opening statement, as I read, is full of false narratives, aided by Republicans on this committee who still refuse to release their own investigation transcripts. So, Mr. Chairman, if your findings are solid, release those transcripts now. The taxpayers who funded this work deserve transparency, not cherry-picked quotes that suit your sham narrative. And again, I ask that the transcripts, all of them, be made publicly so that the public can read and see everything, not cherry-picked sentences. Before it too was fed into the wood chipper, USAGM and its broadcasters were reaching a record 427 million people weekly, delivering objective news to China, Iran, Russia, and other repressive states. Last year, VOA's Persian service recorded 223 million visits to its website, doubling over 4 years. It had 9.8 million social media followers and 1.8 billion Instagram views. Then, Ms. Lake, you put VOA Persian on leave in March, scrambled to restore it in June when war erupted, and inexplicably, a week later, announced mass firings. So the question is, which is it? Is USAGM and the work it supports unsalvageable waste, as you have said, or is it a critical tool for diplomacy and facts? What you're doing isn't efficiency, it's chaos. The dysfunction lies in the administration's allergy to truth and democracy, the two pillars that USAGM aims to promote abroad. So I'm not surprised by the choice to gut USAGM, since the first Trump administration targeted the enterprise, violating laws and journalistic integrity to shape it into a state media, like Russia's or North Korea's. Today, those regimes are actually cheering as we surrender another potent set of soft power tools and abandon the airwaves. The Trump administration, again, chose extremism over facts, tearing down rather than building up our information advantage. Will Congress defend USAGM and free media, or rubber stamp this capitulation to China, Russia, and Iran? Our adversaries are already filling the void. But it's not too late to savage USAGM. Not from itself, as Ms. Lake says, but from this administration's short-sighted hatchet job. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member for his comments. I'd say be careful what you wish for. Ms. Lake has provided binders and binders of information that have been included in her opening statement, so they are in the official record, and I'm sure everybody will looking forward to reading that documentation. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have the Senior Advisor for the U.S. Agency of Global Media, Ms. Kari Lake, before us today. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to roughly 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize you, Ms. Lake, for any opening statement that you may have.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Mast and Ranking Member Meeks and members of this House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thanks for having me. My name is Kari Lake. I'm the Trump Administration Senior Advisor to the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Before I get started, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to let you know this opening statement I'll be delivering is a shortened version of a longer version that I have submitted to you earlier and would love to be put into the congressional record. Last December, President-elect Donald Trump called me and asked if I would help reform U.S. Agency for Global Media and the Voice of America, and I said yes. I was honored and eager to help these institutions tell America's story to the world. But within days in my role as senior advisor, it became increasingly clear that reform was nearly impossible. The agency was incompetent and mismanaged and deeply corrupt, politically biased, and frankly, a serious threat to our national security. USAGM oversees VOA, Office of Cuba Broadcasting, and grantees like Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Middle East Broadcasting Network, Open Technology Fund, and Frontline Media Fund, all of which are 100% funded by the hardworking American people. Over the past 15 to 20 years, the agency has become a significant national security risk. They hire a shockingly high number of foreign nationals, and they conduct subpar security vetting, so bad that top intelligence agencies revoked this agency's ability to do even the most basic background checks. So many of USAGM's hires come from countries hostile to the United States. Over the decade from 2010 to 2020, Office of Personnel Management and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence repeatedly flagged severe security failures, but USAGM leadership ignored them. They continued to grant journalists and technicians, many from foreign nations, high-level security access based on falsified documents and incomplete background checks, phony names, phony social security numbers. Even after corrective actions were taken in the final months of the Trump administration, these safeguards were reversed by the incoming Biden administration. The scale of the problem is staggering. During the first Trump administration, the political appointees led by CEO Michael Pack got to work fixing it. And they discovered that out of 150 people who were hired during that time period when they weren't doing appropriate vetting, 500 of them were still out there and they could not find them. They went back and re-vetted everybody, but 500 had gone missing. They could not be located for further screening. Foreign employees with social security numbers that are fake and fake names given top secret access now missing. That keeps me up at night. My team is working to track them down. Our new security director is working to try to turn this agency around and make it where it's safer. It's a vast problem that we've uncovered. We've also uncovered that the grantees like Radio Free Europe hired people later identified as foreign spies. At one point, they nearly hired more than 20 spies from a nation hostile to America. Those hires were stopped thanks to a timely tip, and I'm happy to give you more information on that in a secure setting. Voice of America has employed individuals with direct ties to hostile nations. They even once paid paid for somebody who worked previously in Russian media writing anti-American stories to come on the staff and continue to write anti-American stories. At one point, a serious security threat to America, an Office of Cuba Broadcasting Cuba, was declared to be a national security threat. He was fired, thankfully, but he worked there for quite some time. So how do they get so many foreign nationals in? Well, they abuse the J-1 visa program, which is a pathway to citizenship intended for exchange students and cultural exchanges, students, camp counselors, and au pairs. It's not intended for journalists, and it's created severe vulnerabilities, and frankly, it has displaced many, many American workers who could have filled these jobs. VOA also sidestepped their charter to be reliable, authoritative news, instead being riddled with political bias and outright anti-American sentiment. Examples, you mentioned it, Chairman, refusing to call Hamas terrorists, glamorizing Che Guevara, airing campaign-style videos favoring President Biden, even broadcasting a graphic depicting President Trump with a swastika over his face on their news. I wouldn't want that, by the way, even if it was President Biden. That's totally inappropriate. And a ridiculous editorial firewall prevents agency leadership like myself from correcting any of the bias or having any say in the editorial content that goes on the air. We've also got financial mismanagement, which I hope we'll go into. $75,000 spent for a COVID study on how Mac computers can be used for social distancing. $100,000 in American taxpayer money to actually sponsor an Afghan cricket team. $400,000 for quid pro quo payments to African VOA affiliates, and they actually wrote quid pro quo next to the budget item. $825,000 for a New York music show and $6 million contract for consulting advice that was never even implemented. I told these stories to people, and many times they say, wow, this place sounds like a crime scene. And I frankly have just learned that it is indeed a crime scene. We've learned that there is an active investigation going on at VOA for a series of threatening phone calls that have been coming out going after one of your colleagues, a sitting member of Congress, with years' worth of threatening phone calls. And they've discovered that those phone calls were coming from inside the Voice of America. This place is rotten. It's rotten to the core. President Trump has asked me to go in and help clean it up. And he's also issued an executive order to reduce this agency down to its mandate, to what is mandated, statutorily required. That's exactly what I'm doing. I don't care if they attack me. We're going to make it right for the American taxpayers. And with that, I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lake, for your opening statements. We're now going to move to member questions. We ask that members keep their questions to 5 minutes. I'm going to begin by working down the line. I'll start by recognizing the Chairman Emeritus, Representative McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lake, thanks for being here today. I want to thank you for visiting with me in my office to talk about these challenges that you've outlined. I think the chairman has outlined them quite well. I want to commend you for reforming USAGM. I think every new administration has a right and responsibility to do so. Your testimony has highlighted systemic problems that must be addressed. More importantly, security lapses, misuse of visas, weak editorial oversight, and much more. I look forward to authorizing this agency with the chairman and his authorization bill to correct these abuses. I remember President Reagan used Voice of America when I was entering college as a frontline voices against Soviet oppression. It was a voice of America, not the voice of anti-America. Recently, I used the Voice of America and Open Technology Fund to translate my report on the origins of COVID-19. We disseminated it through mainland China, broke through the firewall. It went viral, got the attention of the CCP foreign minister, who spoke out against me and the report. That's the kind of impact this agency needs to reach. With the events in Iran, we need America's voice in Iran right now. We need to ensure the Iranian people hear the truth, that we do not intend to harm them, but rather their oppressor and this theocratic regime of the Ayatollah. We need communications inside and outside of Iran. This week, General Vogel, the CENTCOM commander, said the voice of America is a critical tool for American security. You've outlined why there are many insecurities. I hope we can go back to that core mission. My dad's war, combating the Nazis. So my question is, Ms. Lake, how are you working to fix Voice of America so it is the voice of America and not anti-America in Iran, and use the Open Technology Fund to achieve the mission, the core mission that Congress intended?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for laying out when it was a better agency. You're right, Ronald Reagan used it, a great broadcaster, one of the great communicators, and he used it, but times have changed, and it's still doing 1990s style television in a world where people are getting their information right here on their smartphones. It's in the back pocket. And so we need to update it and modernize it. But President Trump's executive order dated March 14th has called for this agency to be brought to its statutory minimum. And I'm glad that you mentioned Iran, because one of the languages that is required in the statute is Farsi, and we are still broadcasting in Farsi. And Ranking Member Meeks said that we have not been, and that we, in a panic, started to put news out in Farsi. That is actually not true. We were in the process of effectuating President Trump's executive order, and in the process of doing that, several malicious lawsuits were started up, and the judge froze us from being able to get news on. We literally were frozen in place because of all of these lawsuits. Once we were freed to start putting news on, we immediately went to what the statutory minimum is, and one of the languages is Farsi going into Iran. And I'm very proud to say that when President Trump, when the bombings happened over the weekend on Saturday, and when President Trump started to speak, we had a crew in on Saturday delivering President Trump's message to the people of Iran in Farsi. It was translated and it went out. Sometimes a lean and mean and a smaller staff makes it easier to get things done. And in one of the emails that I got from our Persian team, they actually said that. They were able to move quicker because it was smaller, the bloat had been diminished. And I'm really proud of the fact that we got that on. We're going to continue to operate at the statutory minimum. We are putting out content in Pashto, Dari, Mandarin, Farsi, and Spanish through Office of Cuba Broadcasting.
I thank you for that response. I think it's very important right now that the Iranian people hear the American story and the American message, and I commend you for your efforts to reform. And I encourage you to get that message into Iran right now. Communication inside and out is so important for those people if they're going to rise up against this oppressive theocracy that we've endured since 1979. I yield back.
Recognized Ranking Member Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first enter into the record a letter that you and I received, Mr. Chairman, from 4 bipartisan members of the International Broadcasting Advisory Board, which Congress established and confirmed in 2023. Thank you. Now, Ms. Lake, you may recall the White House fired the board members earlier. Let me just first say this, because I do agree with Mr. McCall on the need of making sure that the voice of America in those places where our adversaries have false information going through. But you cannot do that simply by reducing and ending all individuals that are work within that agency. So now, these board members, for example, that were fired, despite their political and policy differences, those members wrote, and I quote, defunding, as you have done, these networks, because you can't do anything without money, but defunding these networks at this critical moment will undermine the United States' efforts to counter the biased narratives from America's authoritarian competitors. It's crucial. Some have said that it seems as though that our adversaries under this administration has been considered or treated like they're our allies, and our allies have been treated as if they're our adversaries. Now, I agree with the experts that put this letter in. There are grave risks right now for the United States national security posed by dismantling USAGM and the broadcasters it supports. Now, one of the things I want to do, maybe we can do this and it's trying to save some time. I serve on the Financial Services Committee also, where we often engage with companies about the risk analysis that they perform before making major business decisions to outpace their competitors. And I know I hear my Republican colleagues often say that government should be run like a business. So I just want to try to just get a few yes or no questions in the time that we have, just so that I know we can either get some of the information that the chairman said you are bringing or have brought with you. So my question to you is, did you conduct or review a written analysis before placing most of the USAGM's and VOA's employees on administrative leave on March 15th, before cutting off payments to USAGM grantees in March, or before announcing a reduction in force at the VOA last Friday? Yes or no?
I've been working in media for 30 years, and in every newsroom across this country in that time.
Yes or no? Did you do?
These are complex questions. They're not yes or no questions.
It's either you did a review or you didn't.
We are right-sizing an agency that has grown and grown and grown.
Did you do a review?
We've reviewed, yes, we've reviewed.
You've done a review. Do you have a record of what you reviewed?
We have reviewed the number of employees, the number of languages, but most of all, what we reviewed was an executive order, March 14th, by the man who's in charge of the executive branch.
I want to know.
His name is Donald Trump.
Do you have a record that you can produce? The chairman said you had a bunch of things with you. Do you have a record of what you reviewed and who you reviewed to?
We reviewed the statute.
Do you have a record? Yes or no?
We have the statute, and
do you have a record?
The statute. Yeah, we can pull that statute for
if you have it, not the statute, the record of individuals that you reviewed interviewed, or talked to before you committed your actions of dismantling?
I talked to a lot of people at the agency.
Do you have a record of that?
You could go back and look at emails.
Do you have a record?
Do you want me to pull emails?
I want you to show the record of what you did, Ms. Lake.
Well, you can
Don't
take a
just
look
give
at
me
it.
something that's not verified. Tell me, show me the record, because that's what I hear oftentimes in the business. You have to have a record. Show me the record that you did, what you did, that's all.
It's pretty obvious what we did.
Did you survey? Let me ask this question then. Did you survey employees that was there about waste, fraud, and abuse you believe was occurring at the agency? Did you survey?
We
Since you
know
said
that there's waste, fraud, and abuse.
Did you
There's been
survey the employees? Yes or no?
What?
Yes or no?
These are ridiculous
Did
questions.
you serve? Simple answers. You either did or you didn't.
Yeah, I guess survey means talk
Did
to
you
and
do it
ask
or not?
questions. Sure, we did.
You did? Then you can provide those surveys. You can show us a record of who you
We
talked
did
to.
not run an expensive survey, but I've talked to many people at this agency.
You didn't do. So you didn't do that either. So this was based on a whim. Okay.
Ranking member time has expired. I want to thank you for your 5 minutes of questioning. I'm now going to recognize Representative Smith
Thank
for
you very
5
much.
minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee, Ms. Lake. I chair the Congressional Executive Commission on China. We've had many, many hearings. We've worked on legislation. One of my bills that passed just a few weeks ago was to combat the heinous practice of forced organ harvesting, where 50, 70,000 young people, average age 28, get their organs taken. They're Uyghurs, they're Falun Gong practitioners. It passed 406 to 1, second time it passed last year as well. I've had 4 hearings on it. Xi Jinping is committing atrocities like almost no one else in the world. And whether it be what he's done to Hong Kong, the pervasive use of torture, religious persecution, everywhere you look, genocide against the Uyghurs. And then in your testimony, and I would ask you if you could maybe elaborate on this. You point out that the past leadership of VOA, Mandarin Language Services, conducted annual meetings with the Chinese embassy in Washington. Well, I go to the Chinese embassy myself, outside picketing. We try to meet. I've invited Chinese leaders here from the embassy and from the government many times to testify. Every time they turn us down. But if you could elaborate on those meetings, whatever you could tell us. You also pointed out